Margaret Collins got down on her knees in the middle of a dusty general store floor and picked up every single coin that man had swept off his counter, one by one, while a room full of people watched and laughed. 29 years old, hands shaking, back aching from 3 days of walking, and not one person moved to help her. She pressed those coins against her palm so hard they left marks in her skin. Then she stood up, lifted her chin, and walked out that door without saying a single word. Before we go any further, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, please subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Red Willow, Montana, 1887, and find out what happened next. She had counted those coins 17 times before she ever walked through the door of Harlan Briggs's general store. 17 times, because she needed to be certain. Because certainty was the only thing Margaret Collins had left. $4.32. Enough for a small block of cornmeal, a strip of dried meat, and maybe a tin of beans if Briggs was running a fair price that week. She had done the math in her head during the last 2 miles of walking, calculating down to the penny, because a woman in her position could not afford the luxury of being wrong. Red Willow, Montana was the kind of town that made up its mind about a person before that person ever opened their mouth. Margaret had known towns like this before. She had survived them before. But surviving and belonging were two entirely different things, and she had long stopped pretending she knew what the second one felt like. She pushed open the door to Briggs's store and stepped inside. The floorboards announced her immediately, loud complaining creaks that turned 3 heads before she had taken 2 steps. A woman near the fabric bolts looked up. A man loading a crate by the window glanced over his shoulder. Harlan Briggs himself stood behind the counter, thick arms folded across a chest that had never missed a meal, and he looked at Margaret the way men like him always looked at women like her. Top to bottom, slow, deliberate, like an assessment of livestock. She had felt that look so many times it barely had weight anymore. Or at least, that was what she told herself. "Help you with something?" Briggs asked, though his tone made it clear that helping her was the last thing he intended to do. "Yes, sir." Margaret moved to the counter with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned that confidence without aggression was the safest way to exist in a room that didn't want you there. "I need cornmeal, about 2 pounds, and whatever dried meat you've got at a reasonable price. Beans if you have them." Briggs didn't move toward the shelves. He just kept looking at her, that same slow assessment, and then the corner of his mouth pulled up in a way that had nothing kind behind it. "You come from around here?" he asked. "No, sir. I came in from the east. I'm looking for work." "Work?" He said it like the word tasted funny. "What kind of work?" "Cooking, mostly. Household management. I worked for the Hargrove family in Billings for 4 years. Before that, I kept house for a widow woman down in Cheyenne." The Hargroves. Briggs uncrossed his arms, though not to help her. He leaned forward on the counter instead, bracing himself on both palms, closing the distance between them in a way that was meant to be unsettling. "Daniel Hargrove let you go?" "The family decided to make other arrangements." "I'll bet they did." He laughed then. Not a real laugh, but the kind of sound men make when they want a room to laugh with them. The woman by the fabric bolts smiled. The man near the window turned back around, and Margaret heard him chuckle low under his breath. "Lady your size must have eaten through half their pantry every week." Margaret set her coins on the counter. "Cornmeal and dried meat, please," she said. Her voice did not shake. She was very deliberate about that. Briggs looked at the coins. Then he looked at her. Then he reached out and swept every one of them off the counter with the back of his hand, sending them scattering across the floorboards in all directions. A bright, terrible racket that made everyone in the store turn and look. "I don't think so," he said. "Women like you make my customers uncomfortable. Take up too much space. Bad for business." The woman by the fabric bolts turned away. The man near the window said nothing. A child standing near the door stared openly, mouth parted. And Margaret Collins got down on her knees and picked up every single coin. She found the first one near the base of the counter, wedged against a knothole in the floorboard. She found 2 more near the barrel of dried goods. One had rolled all the way to the center of the room, and she crossed the floor on her knees to retrieve it because it was hers, because she had earned it, and because no man's cruelty was worth 4 cents. Nobody helped her. Nobody spoke. Briggs watched with his arms folded again, satisfied, the way a man looks when he's made his point and knows it landed. Margaret collected every coin. She stood up. She looked Harlan Briggs directly in the eyes. Not defiant, not pleading, just direct, just clear. The look of a woman who has decided that your opinion of her is no longer worth the energy it costs to argue. And she walked out of his store. The door closed behind her. The floorboards creaked once more, and then were silent. She heard laughter start up again inside before she had even cleared the porch. She kept walking until she reached the side of the building, where a narrow alley ran between the general store and the hardware shop next door, and she pressed her back against the worn wooden planks and closed her eyes. 3 days of walking. The last of her coins. No job. No room at the boarding house. She'd learned that an hour ago when Mabel Finch had taken one look at her on the porch and said, quite pleasantly, that she didn't have anything available, which Margaret knew was a lie because she'd seen the vacancy sign still hanging in the window as she walked away. She was 29 years old, and she was out of road. The tears came without permission, the way they always do when you've held them back too long. Not soft, not quiet, but the hard, heaving kind that embarrasses a person because they feel like defeat. And Margaret had told herself 100 times over the last week that she was not going to be defeated by this. She was not going to sit down in the dirt and stop moving. She had survived worse. She had survived the Hargroves and their polite cruelty. She had survived her mother's death when she was 16 and her father's disappearance 3 years after that. She had survived every small town and every folded arm and every slow, assessing look. But right now, in this alley, with her coins cutting into her palm and her feet bleeding inside her boots, she could not find the part of herself that knew how to keep standing. So she let herself cry. She didn't hear him approach. The first thing she knew of him was a shadow. Long, quiet, the shadow of a man who had stopped a respectful distance away and was waiting. Margaret pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and looked up. Howe was tall. The kind of tall that came with a life spent working the land, rather than anything God had simply given him. Weathered face. Dark eyes that were steady in a way that most men's weren't. A worn hat pushed back just enough that she could read his expression, which was not pity, not amusement, not the careful blankness of a man who wanted to walk away but felt obligated to stop. He looked, if she was being honest, like someone who was angry, not at her, at something he had seen. "Don't cry," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. "You're coming with me." Margaret stared at him. "I beg your pardon?" He took one step closer, still at a distance a decent man maintained, and pulled his hat off, held it against his chest. "Name's Jackson Reed. I own a ranch about 12 miles up the mountain. I came into town today for feed, and I ended up watching what happened in that store instead." "You were inside?" "Yes, ma'am, I was." "You didn't say anything?" "No." Something shifted in his jaw. "I didn't, and I'm sorry for that. I should have stepped in sooner." Margaret looked at this man she did not know, standing in a dirty alley in a town that had decided she was worthless, offering her something she couldn't yet identify. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Reed?" "I'm suggesting you've got skills, and I've got a ranch that needs them. My cook left 6 months ago. The men are living on salt pork and regret. My records are a mess, and my supply orders have been going sideways since January." He turned his hat in his hands once. "I need someone who can run a kitchen and make sense of numbers. You told Briggs you cooked for the Hargroves 4 years. That right?" "That's right." "Daniel Hargrove's a demanding man. You lasted 4 years. You know what you're doing." "He let me go because his wife decided my appearance reflected poorly on the household." Jackson Reed looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Hargrove's opinions don't mean anything to me," he said. "You interested in the work or not?" Margaret should have said no. Any reasonable woman would have said no. A stranger in an alley offering employment 12 miles up a mountain that she'd never seen. Reason said no, caution said no, Every lesson she had ever learned about the world and the price of trust said no. But reason had brought her to this alley with bleeding feet and $4 in her hand. And something about this man's eyes, the steadiness of them, the anger that was still there but controlled, the fact that he was holding his hat against his chest, like this conversation mattered, made her ask a question instead of refusing. What are the terms? Something in Jackson Reed's posture changed. Not relief exactly. More like recognition. Fair wage, he said. Same as any man on the ranch. Room and board. You eat what the hands eat. You work what the ranch needs. If it doesn't suit you after a month, I drive you back to town myself and I don't say a word about it. And the men on your ranch? What about them? Have any of them got opinions like the people in that store? He held her gaze. Any man on my property who treats a person that way can start looking for work somewhere else. I run my ranch one way, Miss Collins. Margaret Collins. Miss Collins. He settled the hat back on his head. I run my ranch one way. A person earns their place through their work. Nothing else factors in. You work hard, you're respected. That's the whole of it. Margaret uncurled her hand. The coins had left deep red impressions in her palm. $4.32. Not enough for a meal. Not enough for a room. Certainly not enough to build a life on. She looked at the impressions in her hand. Then she looked at Jackson Reed. I'll need a day to know if I believe you, she said. That's fair. And I have one condition of my own. Name it. I earn my place, same as you said. But I mean it in both directions. No sympathy. No special allowances because of what happened today. If I'm not doing the work to your standard, you tell me straight, and I'll do the same. Jackson Reed looked at her for 3 long seconds. Then he nodded. A single, clean dip of his chin. Agreed, he said. They walked out of that alley together. The big, weathered rancher and the woman everyone in Red Willow had already decided was nothing, and if any of the townspeople noticed, they didn't say so. Margaret matched his stride, which took some effort because his legs were longer, but she managed it. She was not going to be escorted. She was going to walk beside him, and there was a difference that mattered to her enormously. Jackson's wagon was hitched outside the feed store 3 buildings down. A big dun horse stood in the traces, unhurried, ears swiveling at their approach. Jackson loaded the sacks he'd already purchased, methodical, efficient, no wasted motion. And then he came around to the passenger side and offered his hand to help her up. Margaret took it. Not because she couldn't manage the step herself, but because it was offered with the kind of straightforwardness that expected nothing back from it. She settled onto the wagon bench. He came around and climbed up on the other side, gathered the reins. 12 miles, she said. You mentioned that. Give or take. Road gets rough the last 2. All right. She set her bag on her lap, fingers laced over the top of it. I'll know by morning whether I'm staying. Fair enough. He clicked his tongue at the horse. The wagon rolled forward. You hungry? The question was so simple that it almost caught her off guard. Yes, she said. Because she was, and because lying about basic facts seemed like a poor way to begin whatever this was. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. Jackson reached behind the bench without looking back, pulled a cloth-wrapped bundle from somewhere behind the seat, and set it on the bench between them. Biscuit and some dried apple. It's not much. It's plenty. She picked up the biscuit. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Jackson. Thank you, Jackson. The wagon moved through Red Willow and out onto the open road, and Margaret ate her biscuit and looked straight ahead and breathed through the strange sensation of something loosening in her chest. Not hope exactly, because she had been disappointed by hope too many times to name what she felt as something so fragile. But the coins were still in her hand, and the road was opening up ahead of them, and for the first time in 3 days, she was not walking alone. The road climbed steadily after the first mile, leaving the flat basin of the town behind and moving into the foothills where the pines grew close together and the air changed character entirely. Cooler, sharper, carrying the smell of pine resin and something clean underneath it that Margaret couldn't name. She had never been to Montana before. She had come from Wyoming, following a rumor of work that turned out to be nothing. Before Wyoming, there had been Colorado. Before Colorado, Kansas. She had been moving west for 2 years, following the slim margin of opportunity that opened up for women who cooked and cleaned and organized and kept their eyes down and didn't complain. And in every place she had landed, the same assessment had waited for her. The look, the calculation, the slow decision that her body made her less than what she was. She was tired of it in a way that lived in her bones, not just her mind. "You don't have to talk," Jackson said. He was watching the road, hands easy on the reins. "Some people need quiet after a day like today." "I don't mind talking." She looked over at him. "What happened to your cook, the one who left?" "Frank. He was with me 3 years. His daughter had a baby down in Denver, and his wife wanted to be near family. Can't fault a man for that." "No, you can't." She paused. "And the records? You mentioned they were a mess." "Frank was a good cook, not much of a bookkeeper. I've been doing it myself since January, which means I've been doing it badly." He said it matter-of-factly, no embarrassment. "I know cattle, I know land. I do not know ledgers." "I do," Margaret said. The Hargrove household had 12 people on staff and a monthly budget that Mrs. Hargrove liked to change on a whim. "I kept track of every penny for 4 years. Jackson glanced at her, just briefly. "All right," he said. "I'm not saying that to impress you." "I know. You're saying it because it's relevant." She looked back at the road. "Yes." The wagon climbed, the pines thickened, the town of Red Willow disappeared behind a long curve, and then it was gone entirely, and Margaret felt its absence like a physical thing, the release of a pressure she hadn't fully realized she was carrying. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "Why did you come after me? You could have walked out of that store and forgotten the whole thing." Jackson was quiet for a moment. The horse's hooves struck the road in an even rhythm. A bird called from somewhere in the trees. "Because what Briggs did was wrong," he said. "And I watched it happen, and I didn't stop it when I should have. I'm not in the habit of letting things I know are wrong just stay wrong when I can do something about it. You couldn't have known I'd be behind the building." "No, but I looked." She thought about that. "Most people wouldn't have looked," she said. "Most people," he agreed, without any particular judgment in it. Just a statement of fact. The road roughened as he'd promised, the last 2 miles a washboard of rocks and ruts that the wagon bounced over with jarring persistence. Margaret held the side rail and kept her balance and did not complain, and Jackson navigated the worst of it without comment, steering around the largest obstacles with the ease of long practice. And then the ranch appeared. It was not what she had expected, though she'd had no particular picture of it in her mind, only the abstract idea of a mountain ranch, which could have meant anything. What she saw instead was a working property, serious and unglamorous, and clearly managed by a man who cared deeply about function and very little about appearance. A main house of weathered timber. A long bunkhouse set back to the left. A barn twice the size of either structure, solid and dark, with a weather vane at the peak. Fences running in both directions. A water trough. A woodpile that stood as tall as a man. 3 hands were visible in the yard when the wagon pulled in. They looked up. Their faces went through the same sequence she always saw. Recognition that a stranger had arrived, assessment of who that stranger was, and then the particular recalibration that happened when the stranger was her. One of them, young, blonde, the kind of young where he probably still thought his face would never age, said something to the man beside him. Too low to hear. The man beside him, older and darker, said something back. Jackson pulled the wagon to a stop. "That's Cody, Pete, and Ruiz," he said, looking at the 3 men. "Cody's been here 2 years. Pete and Ruiz almost 4. They do good work." He climbed down from the wagon and came around to offer his hand again. "Miss Collins is going to be cooking and managing the household accounts. She starts today." The 3 men looked at her. Cody, the young blonde one, opened his mouth. "She going to be able to—" he started. "Yes," Jackson said, and the word came out flat and final in a way that closed the sentence before it finished. "She's going to be able to. Any questions about that can wait until after she's had time to show you." He turned back to Margaret. I'll show you the kitchen, main house, through the front. Margaret climbed down from the wagon. She took his hand because it was offered, and because the step down was a long one. And she felt the 3 sets of eyes on her back as she followed Jackson toward the front door. She didn't turn around. She had learned a long time ago that turning around when you felt people watching only encouraged the watching. The kitchen was at the back of the main house, and it was, as advertised, a disaster. Not dirty. Someone had been cleaning it without any particular system, but disorganized in the specific way that a space becomes when it's been used without intention. Supplies crowded into corners without order. A ledger on the table near the window, open to a page of numbers that Margaret could see at a glance, needed serious help. An iron stove that was solid and functional, but had clearly been running at the mercy of whoever got there first. She stood in the middle of it and turned slowly, taking it in. "Well," she said, "I know. The stove's in good condition, that's something." She moved to the supply shelves and ran her eye along the contents. "You've got duplicates of some things and nothing of others. Someone's been ordering without checking what's already here." "That would be me." "Do you have a pencil?" He produced one from somewhere, his coat maybe, and held it out. She took it, pulled the ledger toward her, and flipped to a clean page. "Give me an hour," she said. He looked at her. "Just an hour," she said. "I want to understand what I'm working with before I say another word about what I can do." Jackson Reed looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something she hadn't expected. He pulled out the chair at the kitchen table. "Take all the time you need," he said. She sat down. She put the pencil to the paper, and she began to work. She heard him leave. Quiet footsteps, the soft close of a door. And then she was alone in the kitchen, and for the first time in days, she was doing something she knew how to do. Something that responded to her effort with results instead of rejection. The numbers on the ledger were not impossible. They were messy and inconsistent, and whoever had been entering them, Jackson, doing his best at something outside his skill, had made the same category errors over and over, which meant that once she understood the pattern of his mistakes, she could work backward through them and begin to reconstruct the actual figures. It took her 40 minutes, and at the end of 40 minutes, she sat back and looked at what she had found, and a slow, cold feeling moved through her that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. Something was wrong. Not with Jackson's bookkeeping, which was fixable. Something else. The supply costs didn't match the supply levels. The discrepancy was subtle. Too subtle for a man who was already doing a job outside his expertise. But once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. Money was leaving the ranch that couldn't be accounted for by the supplies that were supposed to be arriving. She sat very still for a moment. Then she turned to a fresh page and started writing down numbers. She was still writing when Jackson came back. He stopped in the doorway, looked at the table, at the pages she had covered, at the expression on her face. "What is it?" he said. Margaret set down the pencil. "How much do you trust your supply man?" she asked. Howe was quiet for a moment. "Walt Greer. I've used him for 3 years." "And your former manager? The one before Frank?" Something shifted behind his eyes. "Dale Marsh. Left about 18 months ago. Said he had family business to attend to." "Did he leave, or did he go?" She looked at him directly. "Was it his choice or yours?" Jackson came fully into the kitchen. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily. "I told him to go," he said. "There were some things that didn't add up. I didn't have proof of anything, so I couldn't call him out on it. But I didn't trust him anymore, so I let him go." "What things didn't add up?" "Supply shortfalls. Payments that went out for deliveries that came in short." Margaret turned the ledger so he could see the page she'd been working on. "It didn't stop when Dale Marsh left," she said. "Whoever was working with him on the outside, your supply man, someone else, I don't know yet. They kept going. The amounts are smaller now. Careful. The kind of small that a busy man running a ranch by himself might not notice." She pointed to the column of figures she'd reconstructed. "But it's been consistent. Every month for at least the last year. And it adds up." Jackson stared at those numbers. His jaw had gone very tight. How much? He said. She told him. He was silent for a very long time. Outside, one of the hands called something to another. The horse in the paddock moved. Wind hit the side of the house and rattled a loose board somewhere above them. I need to ride out tomorrow, Jackson said finally. I need to check something. You shouldn't show your hand yet, Margaret said. If someone knows you're looking, they'll cover their tracks. He looked at her. You're right. A pause. How do you know to think like that? Because I've spent my whole life being underestimated, she said simply. When people think you're not worth paying attention to, they get careless. I've learned to notice what careless people leave behind. Jackson Reed looked at her across the battered kitchen table in the last of the afternoon light, and something in his expression shifted into something else. Not pity, not even respect exactly, but the particular look of a man who is seeing something clearly for the first time. You told me you'd know by morning whether you were staying, he said. I did. Do you need until morning? Margaret looked at the ledger, at the numbers she had found, and the wrong she had already seen that needed fixing, and the work ahead that would take patience and precision and exactly the kind of attention to detail that every person who had ever dismissed her had failed to notice she possessed. No, she said. I already know. She picked up the pencil. I'm staying. She stayed, and the morning after that first night at Jackson Reed's mountain ranch, Margaret Collins woke before anyone else, built the kitchen fire from cold ash, and had biscuits in the oven and coffee on the stove by the time the first hand pushed open the bunkhouse door. She heard them before she saw them. Boots on the porch steps, low voices, the particular shuffle of men who had not yet fully committed to being awake. Then the kitchen door swung open, and Cody walked in first, the way young men always walked into rooms they assumed belonged to them, and he stopped dead when he smelled the coffee. He looked at the stove. He looked at the biscuits cooling on the rack. He looked at Margaret, who was already at the table with Jackson's ledger open in front of her, pencil in hand, working through the previous month's supply entries before the day officially started. You been up long? Cody asked. Long enough, she said, without looking up. He poured himself coffee. She heard him take the first sip, heard the small involuntary sound he made that men make when something tastes better than they expected, and he didn't say anything after that, which was, she had learned, the highest form of kitchen compliment a ranch hand ever paid. Pete and Ruiz came in behind him. Pete was the older one, dark-haired, deliberate in his movements, the kind of man who watched before he spoke. He nodded at her when he came in. A small thing, barely a movement, but she registered it. Ruiz was somewhere in the middle in age, with a broad face that was either naturally serious or naturally tired, and he went straight for the coffee like a man who needed it medically. Jackson came in last. He had already been to the barn. There was hay dust on his coat, and he stopped at the door and looked at the kitchen, the way a man looks at something he can't quite account for. How long have you been up? He asked. Since 4, she said. That's before me. I know. He sat down at the other end of the table, accepted the cup she had already poured for him without comment, and looked at the ledger. Find anything else last night? He asked, low enough that only she could hear. 3 more discrepancies, small ones, but they follow the same pattern. She turned the page toward him without making it obvious, angling it so the men eating across the room couldn't see. Whoever's doing this is consistent, almost too consistent, like they stopped worrying about being caught a long time ago. Something cold moved across Jackson's face. Not anger, not yet. The controlled thing that comes before anger in a man who knows how to manage himself. Keep going, he said quietly. I intend to. That was how the first week went. Margaret cooked, and she catalogued, and she mapped the discrepancies with the same methodical patience that had gotten her through 4 years of the Hargroves' particular brand of demanding. She said little about what she was finding. She watched instead. She watched the way supplies came in. She watched who signed for what. She watched the way Walt Greer, the supply man, lingered a little too long in the yard on delivery days. Not doing anything suspicious exactly, but present in a way that a man who just wanted to drop goods and move on wouldn't be. The ranch hands noticed her noticing things, but they didn't say anything about it. Cody had gone from skeptical to begrudgingly appreciative somewhere around the third day, which she knew because he started clearing his plate and bringing it to the basin without being asked. A small act of courtesy that told her more than any compliment would have. Pete had decided she was competent by the end of day 2 and had operated on that basis ever since. Ruiz was the most interesting. He watched her the way she watched things, and she had the feeling he was working something out about her that he hadn't finished yet. It was Ruiz who came to find her on the 8th day, when she was in the side yard checking the count on the stored winter feed against the delivery record from the previous month. He came up quiet, not sneaking, just naturally quiet in the way some men were, and stood a few feet away until she looked up. "Something wrong with the count?" he asked. She considered him for a moment. "Why do you ask?" "Because you've been out here 3 mornings in a row checking those same sacks." He held her gaze. "And every time you come back inside, you write something down." She looked at him, steady, waiting to see where this went. "You notice a lot," she said. "Tends to help on a ranch." She set the tally sheet against her knee. "How long have you been here?" "Almost 4 years." "And Dale Marsh was the manager when you arrived?" The name landed on Ruiz like a stone, landing in still water. She saw the ripple move through him, fast and controlled, but real. "For about 6 months after I got here, yeah," he said. "Then Jackson let him go." "Did you trust him?" Ruiz was quiet for 3 full seconds. "No." "Did you ever tell Jackson that?" "Jackson already knew. He didn't need me to tell him." He paused. "Why are you asking about Marsh?" Margaret made a decision. It was the kind of decision that was partly calculation and partly instinct, and in her experience, the instinct part mattered more than most people gave it credit for. "Because I think Dale Marsh didn't just disappear," she said. "I think he left behind a system, and I think someone outside this ranch has been using that system ever since." Ruiz went very still. "How much?" he asked. The same question Jackson had asked. The 2 words that cut straight to the thing that mattered. She told him the same figure she had told Jackson. Ruiz exhaled slowly through his nose. Then he said a word in Spanish that she didn't know but understood from the tone perfectly well. "I need you to do something for me," she said. "And I need you not to tell anyone yet, not even Jackson." He looked at her sharply. "The next delivery," she said. "I need you to be the one who signs for it, not Jackson, and I need you to watch where Greer goes after he leaves the yard." Ruiz was quiet. "You think he's meeting someone," he said. "I think he's reporting to someone, and I think that someone wants to know exactly how much trouble this ranch is in." She held his gaze. "If we tip our hand too early, they'll cover everything, and we'll have nothing. And if I do this, if I watch Greer, what happens after? Then we'll know who the other end of this is, and then we can decide what to do about it." Ruiz looked at her for a long moment. The serious face gave nothing away. Then he gave a single, slow nod. The kind of nod that meant a man had made up his mind and didn't need to say anything else about it. "All right," he said. The delivery came 2 days later. Walt Greer drove his wagon into the yard mid-morning, the same as always. A big, florid man with a loud voice that he used to make himself seem friendly. And it worked on most people because most people didn't listen for what was underneath the loudness. Margaret had listened. Underneath it, Greer was careful, calculating. His eyes moved fast even when his mouth was doing its friendly work, taking inventory of the yard, the hands, who was where, and doing what. She stayed in the kitchen. She did not come out. She had made a point, over the previous week, of being visible during delivery days. It was important that Greer had a picture of the ranch's rhythm. But today she stayed back, and she watched through the small side window as Ruiz signed the delivery sheet and exchanged a few words, and Greer climbed back on his wagon and rolled out of the yard. Ruiz followed on horseback 20 minutes later. Casual, like a man with an errand in town. She waited. Jackson found her in the kitchen around noon, when Ruiz still wasn't back. "Where's Ruiz?" he asked. Margaret set down her pencil. She had decided, somewhere in the last 2 days, that this conversation was inevitable, and that she needed to have it cleanly. "I asked him to follow Greer after the delivery," she said. Jackson went completely still. "You asked my hand," he said, very carefully, "to conduct surveillance on my supply man, without telling me." "Yes." The word sat between them. "Why?" "Because I needed to know who Greer reports to, and I didn't want to risk you reacting before we had the answer. I'm sorry for going around you. I'm not sorry for doing it." Jackson pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, and she could see him working through it. The irritation, the recognition that she had a point, the decision about which one of those things to lead with. He led with the recognition. She gave him credit for that. "What do you think you're going to find?" he said. "I think someone bigger than Walt Greer has been running this," she said. "Greer's not smart enough to have designed it. He's the mechanism, not the mind behind it. Someone told him what to skim, how much, and when. And that someone has been watching this ranch for a long time, waiting for it to get weak enough." "Weak enough for what?" She looked at him. "To buy." A long silence. "My land isn't for sale," Jackson said. "I know that," Margaret said. "But whoever's behind this is betting that if they make things hard enough for long enough, it will be." Jackson's hands were flat on the table, perfectly still, and that stillness was the most contained anger she had ever seen in a person. Not explosive, controlled, like a fire that had been banked carefully but was burning just as hot. "I need a name," he said. "I know. That's what Ruiz is getting us." Ruiz came back 3 hours later. He came into the kitchen, and he closed the door behind him, and he looked at both of them with an expression that Margaret had not seen on him before. Not his usual serious composure, but something underneath that, something with edges to it. "His name is Charles Whitaker," Ruiz said. The name hit Jackson like something physical. She saw it. A single, sharp contraction of his face, there and gone in half a second, but she caught it. "You know him," she said. "He approached me 2 years ago," Jackson said. His voice was level, but level in the way a wire is level when it has too much tension on it. "Wanted to buy the upper 30 acres. I told him no." "He didn't take that well?" "He took it fine, smiled, shook my hand, said he understood." Jackson's jaw tightened. "That was the last I heard from him directly." "Because after that he went indirect," Margaret said. "Greer met him at the saloon in Mill Haven," Ruiz said. "Stayed about 20 minutes. When Greer came out, he had an envelope." "Did you see Whitaker clearly?" Margaret asked. "Well enough. Expensive coat, pocket watch. The kind of man who's very comfortable letting other people do his work for him." Ruiz paused. "He's not just some businessman passing through. He's got a real estate operation running out of Mill Haven. Land acquisitions. He's been buying up distressed properties across the county for the last 3 years." Margaret turned that over. "Has he been creating the distress?" Jackson asked. The question came out quiet. Dangerously quiet. "I think that's exactly what he's been doing," Margaret said. She stood up and moved to the shelf where she'd been keeping her growing file of copied records. Careful transcriptions she'd made from the ledger over the past week, with her own notations beside each anomaly. She spread them on the table. "Look at the pattern," she said. "The shortfalls started small, right after Marsh left. Whoever took over for Marsh on the outside, Greer, or someone Greer reports to, they kept it conservative. Enough to drain the ranch slowly. Enough to create debt without triggering suspicion." She pointed to the progression of figures. "But over the last 6 months, the amounts have started to increase, just slightly. But the trajectory is clear." "They're accelerating," Jackson said, "because they're getting close to the number they need. The number where this ranch becomes impossible to sustain without outside help." She looked at him. "What would that number be for you?" He named it. She pointed to a date on her reconstruction. 8 months out, at the current rate of loss. Jackson stared at it. She gave him the moment. Didn't push. Some information needed time to settle before a person could move through it to the next thing. "What do we do?" he said finally. "First, we stop the bleeding. Tomorrow morning, I want to change the supply account. Everything goes through me, directly. No more Greer. He'll notice immediately. I'm counting on it. Because when he notices, he'll report to Whitaker. And when Whitaker knows his mechanism has been shut down, he'll have to make a move. She gathered the papers back into their careful order. Right now, he thinks this ranch is in the dark. The moment he finds out someone's been watching, he'll have to decide whether to cut his losses or escalate. And if he escalates, Ruiz asked, then we'll know what we're really dealing with. She looked at both of them. But I don't think he will. Men like Whitaker don't get their hands dirty if they can avoid it. He'll try something legal first, some kind of pressure. He can't force a sale, Jackson said. No, but he can try to manufacture debt, or challenge a title, or find some legal mechanism to create a problem that looks like it has to be solved by selling. She met his eyes. Which is why I need to get into the property records. All of them. Title, deed, any encumbrances. If Whitaker's going to come at you through the law, I want to know before he does. Jackson looked at her across the table. This woman who had arrived 8 days ago with bleeding feet and $4 in her hand, sitting in his kitchen with his most private financial information spread out before her, telling him exactly what she needed and why and what she planned to do about it. You've done this before, he said. Done what? Untangled something that someone else had deliberately knotted. She thought about that. I've spent a lot of years paying attention to things that other people assumed I wasn't noticing. Because they underestimated you. Every time. She said it without bitterness. Just fact. Jackson nodded slowly. The property records are in the chest in my office. I'll get them out tonight. He paused. Margaret. It was the first time he had used her given name. She looked up. Thank you, he said, for not walking away from this. She held his gaze for a moment. I told you I was staying. I know. A pause. I just wanted to say it. She nodded, pulled the ledger back toward her, picked up the pencil. Then let's get to work, she said. The supply change landed on Walt Greer the next morning, like a slap he hadn't seen coming. Margaret was the one who met him at the gate when he arrived with his usual inventory, and she handed him a letter, calm, polite, written in her clear hand, informing him that as of today, all supply orders for the Reed Ranch would be placed directly through the depot in Millhaven, and his services would no longer be required. Greer read the letter twice. Then he looked up at her, and the friendly loudness dropped away entirely, and what was underneath it was something much less pleasant. Who the hell are you? He said. I'm the ranch manager, she said pleasantly. Is there anything unclear in the letter? Jackson Reed hired you? His voice had taken on a specific quality. A man who is recalculating, fast. Any questions about ranch operations can be directed to Mr. Reed. I'm sure he'd be glad to discuss it. She smiled. Good morning, Mr. Greer. She turned and walked back toward the house. She heard him behind her. The sharp, furious way he gathered his reins, the wagon turning too fast, the horse startled into a jog. She heard the sound of it retreating down the road, and she waited until it was gone before she let out the breath she'd been holding. Cody was leaning against the porch rail. He had watched the whole exchange. That man, Cody said carefully, did not look happy. No, Margaret agreed. He didn't. Are we going to have a problem? She looked at Cody. This young, blonde, skeptical man who had doubted her 8 days ago and was now asking her directly whether they were going to have a problem, which meant he had already decided which side of the thing he was standing on. Possibly, she said honestly. But we were already going to have a problem. The difference is that now we know it's coming. Cody absorbed that. What do you need from me? He asked. She looked at him for a moment. The question was so straightforward that it almost caught her off guard, the same way Jackson's question in the alley had almost caught her off guard, the simple sincerity of people who had decided you were worth asking. Keep your eyes open, she said. If anyone comes onto this property that you don't recognize, you find me or you find Jackson immediately. Don't confront anyone on your own. Yes, ma'am. She went inside. That evening, after the ranch had settled and the hands were in the bunkhouse, Jackson brought out the property records. They spread them across the kitchen table. The original deed, the title documentation, the survey maps, the transfer records going back to when his father had first claimed the land in 1869. Margaret read everything twice. She found it on the third document. It was a surveyor's notation, made 6 years ago, tucked into the technical language of a boundary reassessment, a reference to a mineral deposit assessment that had been conducted on the northern section of the Reed property. The notation was dry, technical, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But Margaret was looking for everything. She read it 3 times to be certain. Then she set it down and sat very still for a moment. "Jackson," she said. He looked up from the deed he was reading. She turned the document toward him and put her finger on the notation. He read it. She watched his face change. "I never knew this was in here," he said. It came out low, almost a whisper. "When was the boundary reassessment done?" He checked the date. 6 years ago. My father was still alive then. He handled the paperwork." His voice was strange. "He never said anything about this. He may not have understood what the notation meant. It's buried in technical language." She kept her voice steady. "But someone else read this document and understood it perfectly. Whitaker, or someone who works for Whitaker. They would have had access to county survey records. Any land acquisition operation running at his level would review those as a matter of course." She looked at him. "Jackson, if this assessment is accurate, if there's what this notation suggests on your northern section, then Whitaker's not trying to buy a cattle ranch," Jackson said. "He's been trying to buy a fortune," she said quietly. "And you've been standing in his way for 6 years without knowing it." The silence in the kitchen was the kind of silence that has weight to it. Jackson stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, and she gave him the silence because it was necessary. Because some revelations needed a moment of simply being held before a person could carry them forward. When he turned back around, his face had settled into something resolved. "What do we need to prove this?" he said. "The original survey, an independent assessment from a surveyor we trust, and the connection between Whitaker and Marsh, documented proof that the manipulation of your accounts was coordinated. The first 2 I can get. The third one is what I've been building," she said. She put her hand on the files she had been compiling. 8 days of records, 12 discrepancies fully documented, 3 delivery entries that don't match the supply invoices, and now Ruiz as a witness to Greer meeting Whitaker. She looked at him steadily. "It's not enough yet, but it's getting there." Jackson Reed looked at the woman across his kitchen table, the woman who 8 days ago he had found crying in an alley behind a general store, the woman who everyone in Red Willow had decided was not worth a moment's attention. And he said very quietly, "How did you learn to do all this?" She picked up the pencil. "Same way I learned everything," she said. "I paid attention when no one thought I was worth watching." And she went back to work. 3 days after Ruiz watched Walt Greer walk out of that Millhaven saloon with an envelope in his coat pocket, Charles Whitaker made his first move. It didn't come as a threat. It never did, with men like him. It came as a letter. Jackson found it on the porch when he came back from the northern pasture, tucked under a stone so it wouldn't blow away. A cream-colored envelope, heavy paper, the kind that announced money before you even opened it. His name was written on the front in the careful script of someone who had paid for good schooling and wanted you to know it. He brought it straight to the kitchen. Margaret read it twice, the same way she read everything. Then she set it on the table between them. "He's claiming a surveying error," she said. "He's saying the original boundary line on your northern section was misdrawn in 1869, and that a portion of your land, roughly 40 acres, legally belongs to a parcel he acquired last year." Jackson stared at the letter. "That's not true. I know it's not true. He knows it's not true." She tapped the edge of the paper. "But he's had someone file a formal challenge with the county clerk, which means you now have 60 days to respond with documentation, or the challenge stands by default." By default. Jackson said it like he was tasting something rotten. "That's how it works. He's not trying to win in a fair fight. He's trying to win because you don't have the time or the money to mount a proper defense." She looked at him steadily. Or at least, that's what he's betting on. Jackson pulled the letter toward him, read it himself, put it back down. "What do we do?" he said. "We respond, formally. And we start with the original survey documents your father filed in 1869. She was already moving to the shelf where she had organized the property records over the past 3 days. I found a surveyor's mark in your father's papers 2 nights ago. A reference to a secondary stake point that wasn't in the county records Whitaker would have reviewed. If that stake still exists on the northern section, it proves the original boundary was accurate and his challenge is built on nothing. If it still exists." "Yes, that's the question." She turned around. "I need you to ride the northern section with me tomorrow. I need to know what's up there." Jackson looked at her. Not surprised. She had noticed he'd stopped being surprised by things she said about a week ago, which she took as a good sign. "You know how to ride?" he asked. "Well enough to stay on," she said. "I'm not going to pretend I'm a horsewoman, but I can manage." The corner of his mouth did something. Not quite a smile. More like the preliminary motion of one. "All right," he said. "We leave at first light." Cody overheard the plan and immediately announced that he was coming too, for reasons he described as general usefulness, which Margaret suspected actually meant he had decided to be protective of her without knowing how to say that directly. She didn't argue. 3 sets of eyes on unfamiliar terrain was better than 2. They found the stake on the second hour of riding. It was exactly where the secondary notation in James Reed's original survey had said it would be. A cedar post, weathered to gray, driven deep enough into the rocky soil to survive 2 decades of Montana winters. Carved into the face of it was a surveyor's mark and a date, June 1869. Margaret stood next to it and felt something loosen in her chest. Relief so specific it had a location. Cody crouched next to the post and ran his fingers over the carving. "This is the original line?" "Yes." She had the survey document in her hand. She had folded it into her coat pocket that morning, and she opened it now and showed him the corresponding notation. "This stake establishes the northeastern boundary corner. Whitaker's challenge claims the line runs 14 meters south of this point. It doesn't. It runs right here." She looked at Jackson. "We need a witness. Someone with legal standing to document that this stake exists, and that its position matches the original survey." "There's a surveyor in Millhaven," Jackson said. "Tom Alder. He's honest. He's done work for half the ranches in the county." "Whitaker will have people in Millhaven watching," Ruiz said. He had ridden up quietly while they were examining the stake. Jackson looked at him. "You came too?" "General usefulness," Ruiz said, with precisely the same expression Cody had used, and Cody made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Alder needs to come here, not us going to him," Margaret said. "Can you get word to him without going through town?" "His ranch is 6 miles east," Jackson said. "I can ride cross-country." "Today," she said. "Today," he agreed. She stayed at the stake with Cody and Ruiz while Jackson rode for Alder. The 3 of them waited in the particular quiet of open mountain land, and after a while, Cody sat down on a rock and looked at her with the expression of a man who has been working up to a question for longer than is comfortable. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Go ahead. Why are you doing all this?" He wasn't challenging her. The skepticism was gone, had been gone for days. He was asking something genuine. "You could have just cooked and kept the books and stayed out of it." She thought about how to answer that. "Because it's wrong," she said. "What Whitaker's been doing to this ranch, what Marsh did before him, it's theft. Slow, patient, calculated theft from a man who built something honest." She looked at the stake in the ground. "I've had things taken from me by people who thought they could because they didn't think I was paying attention. I know what that looks like. I know what it costs." She looked back at Cody. "I'm not going to watch it happen to someone else when I can stop it." Cody was quiet for a moment. "Briggs," he said. "The man in the store. Ruiz told us what happened." Margaret went still. "I asked him to," Ruiz said quietly, from where he was standing a few feet away. "I thought they should know." She looked at Ruiz. Something moved through her. Not anger at the breach, but something more complicated than that. Why? Because a person fights harder for someone they understand, Ruiz said simply. Margaret held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the stake in the ground. It doesn't matter, she said. What happened in that store doesn't matter anymore. It matters to us, Cody said, and said it so plainly that there was nothing she could do with it except let it sit there. Tom Alder arrived with Jackson before noon. He was a compact, precise man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the professional manner of someone who was extremely clear about what his function was and extremely good at executing it. He examined the stake, compared it to the original survey, walked the line in both directions, and made his own notations with a calm efficiency that Margaret deeply respected. The stake is consistent with the original survey in every measurement, he said when he was done. The boundary line claimed in the formal challenge does not correspond to any legitimate survey of this property. As far as I can determine, it corresponds to nothing at all. Will you put that in writing? Margaret asked. I will put it in an affidavit, Alder said. Which carries more weight? He looked at her over the top of his spectacles. Are you the one who found the secondary notation in the original documents? Yes. He considered her for a moment. Good eyes, he said, and turned back to his measurements. Jackson caught her eye. That almost smile again. She looked away. They rode back to the ranch with Alder's commitment in hand. A formal affidavit to be delivered within 48 hours. And Margaret's mind was already moving ahead to the next piece. The survey challenge was Whitaker's legal weapon, and they were close to neutralizing it. But a man like Whitaker did not make one move. He made several, at the same time, and he was betting that the chaos of managing all of them simultaneously would break his target before the target could respond to any of them effectively. She needed to know what else was coming. She was still thinking about it when Cody came to the kitchen door late that afternoon with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. There's a man at the gate, he said. Says he wants to speak to the owner. Didn't give a name. Real expensive coat. Margaret and Jackson looked at each other. Whitaker, Jackson said. She shook her head once, a small, sharp movement. Don't go out there angry. He's going to say something designed to make you angry. That's the whole point of coming in person. She held his gaze. Whatever he says, you answer calm. You answer like a man who isn't worried. Because as of right now, you aren't. Jackson took a slow breath, steadied himself in a way she could visibly see. Then he nodded. Come with me, he said. You sure? Yes. They walked out together. Charles Whitaker was exactly what Ruiz had described. A man whose every surface announced comfort and authority, from the cut of his coat to the unhurried way he stood at the gate, like a man who owned everything he was looking at and was simply deciding whether to acknowledge it. He was perhaps 50, well-fed, with a face that probably passed for distinguished in the circles he moved in. He looked at Jackson. Then his eyes moved to Margaret, and she watched the calculation happen in real time, the assessment, the conclusion, the dismissal. He had already decided she was irrelevant. Good, she thought. Let him. Mr. Reed. Whitaker's voice was warm, practiced. I apologize for arriving without notice. I was hoping we might speak privately. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of my ranch manager, Jackson said. A brief pause. Whitaker's eyes moved to Margaret again. Something shifted in them. Not a change of conclusion, just a minor recalibration. Of course. He produced a different smile. I want to be direct with you, Mr. Reed. The legal matter I've raised, the boundary challenge. I'd prefer to resolve it without making it a costly process for either of us. I think there's a simpler solution. Tell me, Jackson said. I'll withdraw the challenge completely, Whitaker said. No legal fees, no surveyor disputes, no county hearings. In exchange, I'd like to make you a fair offer on the northern 40 acres. Jackson's jaw tightened by a fraction. My land isn't for sale. I understand your attachment to the property, I do. But from a practical standpoint, the northern section is difficult terrain. The carrying capacity for cattle is limited, and given the current financial pressures your operation is facing. What do you know about the financial pressures of my operation? Jackson asked. His voice was still level, but just barely. Whitaker spread his hands in a gesture of reasonable openness. I make it my business to understand the market conditions facing ranches in this territory. It's not personal, Mr. Reed. It's prudent. He paused. My offer is generous, more than fair. He named a number. Jackson said nothing. Margaret said nothing. But she had the number now, and the number was significant, because when she compared it against what she knew about the mineral deposit notation in the original survey, about what that land was actually worth, if the deposit was what the assessment suggested, Whitaker's generous offer represented roughly 1/16 of the real value. 1/16. She kept her face completely neutral. I'll need time to consider it, Jackson said. Whitaker nodded. Magnanimous. Of course. Take a week. I'm a reasonable man. He looked at Jackson, then at Margaret. That second look lasting just long enough to be a message. I see you there, and I've already decided you don't matter. I hope we can resolve this sensibly. He left. They stood at the gate and watched him go. When the sound of hooves had faded down the mountain road, Cody, who had been stationed near the barn in case of trouble, walked over and said, What did he want? To buy the northern section, Jackson said, for an insult dressed up as a compliment. You're not selling, Cody said. Not a question. No. Jackson looked at Margaret. He thinks we don't know what's up there. He thinks I'm the cook, she said. Does that bother you? She considered it for one honest moment. It bothered me once when people thought like that. Now I just use it. She turned back toward the house. We have 48 hours until Alder's affidavit arrives. Once we file it, Whitaker's legal challenge collapses. He'll know his first move failed. And then he escalates, Ruiz said. Then he escalates, she agreed. Which means we need to be ready. She was at the kitchen table that night, past 10 o'clock, working by lamplight, when she found the second thing. She had been going through the older supply invoices, the ones from Dale Marsh's time, looking for the pattern at its origin point, trying to establish the timeline of when the scheme had started. And in a bundle of invoices from 2.5 years ago, tucked behind a delivery record that had been filed in the wrong month, she found a letter. It was not addressed to Jackson. It was addressed to Dale Marsh, and it was signed by Charles Whitaker. She read it very slowly, read it again, and then sat with it in her hands for a full minute, because what she was holding was not just evidence of the supply scheme. It was evidence of something larger. Whitaker had not simply told Marsh to skim money. He had told Marsh to manufacture specific financial records, false debt entries, inflated costs, invoices for services never rendered, to make the ranch appear to be in a level of financial distress that would justify intervention by the county land office. He had been trying to create the legal conditions for a forced sale, not just a voluntary one, a forced one. She stood up, walked to Jackson's office, knocked on the door. Come in, he said. She could tell from his voice he hadn't been sleeping. She set the letter on his desk. He read it. She watched his face, and what moved through it was not just anger anymore. It was something colder and more fundamental. The face of a man who has understood, all at once, the full scope of what has been done to him. He was going to take it, Jackson said. Not buy it, take it. Yes. Through the county land office, some legal mechanism, manufactured debt, false insolvency records. He had someone in the county office, or he thought he could get to someone. She pointed to a specific line in the letter. This reference here, to a man named Aldridge. Do you know that name? Jackson looked at it. His expression changed again. Deputy clerk at the county land office, he said. He processes property challenges. There it was, the whole shape of it, visible at last. He built a machine, Margaret said quietly. Marsh on the inside, Greer handling supply theft to generate real financial pressure, Aldridge at the county office to push through whatever legal mechanism he needed at the end. All of it running quietly for years, all of it pointed at this piece of land. Because of what's underneath it. Because of what's underneath it. She sat down across from him. Jackson, this letter is what we need. This is the connection between Whitaker and the account manipulation. This is proof that everything that happened to this ranch was deliberate and orchestrated. He looked at the letter, at her, back at the letter. How did it end up in the supply invoices? He said. I think Marsh was keeping it. Insurance, maybe. The instinct of a man who knew he was working with someone dangerous and wanted something to hold over him. And when you let Marsh go, he left in a hurry and didn't think to retrieve everything. She paused. He either forgot it or he hid it on purpose. I don't know which. Does it matter? Not anymore. She looked at him. We need to get this to a lawyer. A real one. Not someone from Millhaven. Whitaker has too much reach there. Someone from Helena, or Billings. I know someone in Helena, Jackson said slowly. Robert Calloway. I went to school with his younger brother. He's a straight man. Can you reach him fast? I can ride for the telegraph office in Harnett first thing tomorrow. It's 20 miles, but it's the closest office Whitaker doesn't have eyes on. He was already thinking through it. She could see it in the way he held himself. If Calloway can come within the week, then we'll have the affidavit from Alder, the documented account discrepancies, the supply records, Ruiz as a witness, and this letter. She put her finger on Whitaker's signature. All of it together, all of it building to the same conclusion. Is it enough? She had asked herself that question for an hour before knocking on his door. It should be, she said. It has to be. She paused. But there's one more thing we need. What? We need to know if Aldridge at the county office actually received anything from Whitaker, because if Whitaker got to him, there may already be paperwork in motion that we don't know about. Something filed quietly, waiting to be activated. She looked at him. I need to go to the county seat. Jackson looked at her. You said Whitaker thinks you're just the cook, he said. Yes. So if you walk into the county land office, he won't be watching for me. He's watching for you. She held his gaze. I'm the person in this situation that Charles Whitaker has already decided doesn't matter. That's the single greatest advantage we have. Jackson was quiet for the long moment. I don't like it, he said. I know. You'd be walking in there alone. I've been walking into places alone my whole life, she said. At least this time I know what I'm looking for. He looked at her with an expression about him. Another man would have argued, not from logic, but from pride. Jackson argued when he had a genuine reason to, and accepted when he didn't. Take Ruiz, he said. He waits outside. You go in. If anything feels wrong, you walk back out, and you don't stop for anything. Agreed. And you come back to this ranch the same day you leave it. Agreed. He looked at the letter one more time. She was remarkable, he said quietly. The shift in subject was abrupt enough that she blinked. Who? My wife, Eleanor. He said the name with the particular carefulness of someone who had learned to say a name without breaking. She would have liked you. Margaret went still. This was the first time he had mentioned her directly. She had known there was a wife from things the hands had said in passing. Had known she had died, not from anything explicit, but from the way Jackson's office still had 2 chairs at the desk, and the way nobody on the ranch ever mentioned her by name. What was she like? Margaret asked. Stubborn, he said, without hesitation. Smarter than anyone gave her credit for. She used to say that the most powerful thing a woman could be was underestimated, because then nobody was prepared for what you could do. The almost smile came and went. She'd have said you proved her right. The kitchen lamp threw its warm, steady light. Outside, Montana was dark and cold and immense. Inside, something shifted between them. Not a declaration, nothing so clear as that, but a small, significant movement in the quality of the silence. I'm sorry for your loss, Margaret said, simply, meaning it. Thank you. He looked at the letter. Let's not let what she built with me be stolen by someone like Whitaker. No, Margaret said. We won't. She gathered the letter carefully, folded it exactly as it had been found, then placed it in the middle of her document file, the file that was becoming, page by page, the most important thing on this ranch. 2 days later, she rode it to the county seat with Ruiz. She walked into the county land office alone, wearing her plainest dress, her hair pulled back simply, looking, deliberately, like exactly the kind of woman that a busy county clerk would process and forget. She gave a false name, said she was researching historical land grants for a family claim, and she spent 40 minutes in the county records room, going through the filed documents with the same systematic attention she had brought to Jackson's ledgers. She found it on the 31st document she examined. A preliminary petition, filed 3 weeks ago, requesting a county review of the Reed Ranch property title based on documented evidence of financial mismanagement and potential fraudulent conveyance, signed by a Millhaven attorney, with Aldridge's approval notation already stamped on the bottom. Her hands were completely steady. She had trained herself, a long time ago, not to let what she felt show in her hands. She noted the filing number, the date, the attorney's name. She committed every detail to memory because she could not take the document itself. Then she closed the folder, returned it to its place, thanked the clerk pleasantly, and walked out of the county land office into the cold Montana afternoon. Ruiz was exactly where she had left him, leaning against a post at the corner of the building, watching the street with the focused calm of a man who took being useful seriously. "We need to ride," she said. He read her face. "How bad?" "He's already filed," she said. "We have less time than we thought." Ruiz straightened. "How much less?" "Calloway needs to be here within the week, not as a precaution." She was already moving toward the horses. As an emergency. They rode hard back to the mountain. The wind was cold and coming fast off the peaks, and Margaret bent into it and thought about Whitaker's face at the gate. That smooth, reasonable confidence, the generous offer, the warm voice. A man absolutely certain he had already won. She thought about every person who had ever looked at her the way Whitaker had looked at her. Top to bottom. The calculation. The dismissal. She thought about $4.32 and a dirty alley and a man who looked. She rode harder. Jackson was waiting on the porch when they came in. He saw her face before she dismounted. "He already filed," Jackson said. "Not a question. 3 weeks ago." She swung down from the saddle. "Aldridge is his. The petition is already in motion." She looked at Jackson directly. "We need Calloway here now, and we need everything we have. Every record, every document, the letter, Alder's affidavit, all of it. Organized and ready to be presented." She held his gaze. "This is not going to be won quietly anymore. Whitaker's going to find out we've been preparing, and when he does, he'll move to accelerate." "Then we accelerate first," Jackson said. "Yes." She paused. "I need you to trust me with one more thing." "Name it." "When Calloway gets here, when we sit down to build this case, I need you to let me lead it. I know these documents. I know this evidence. I know where every piece connects to every other piece." She said it steadily. "Not because you can't, but because I've been inside this longer than anyone, and the case is stronger if the person who built it presents it." Jackson Reed looked at her for a long, still moment. The wind moved. Somewhere in the barn, one of the horses shifted in its stall. "It was always yours to lead," he said. "I figured that out around day 3. Something moved through her. Something she hadn't felt in so long that she almost didn't recognize its name. She picked up her bag, walked past him toward the kitchen door. "Then let's get to work," she said. "We don't have much time." Robert Calloway arrived on the 5th day. He came up the mountain road in a hired wagon. A lean man in his mid-40s with a lawyer's careful eyes and the kind of handshake that told you immediately he was not performing confidence. He simply had it. Jackson met him at the gate and brought him straight to the kitchen, where Margaret had spent the last 4 days building something that was no longer just a file of documents, but a complete, structured case. Every page was in order. Every discrepancy was annotated. Every connection between Whitaker's letter, Marsh's manipulation, Greer's supply skimming, and Aldridge's county office petition was mapped and cross-referenced with the precision of someone who had been doing this kind of organizational work for years in houses that never gave her credit for it. Calloway walked in, looked at the table, looked at Margaret. "You're the ranch manager," he said. "Yes. Jackson's telegram said you built this case." "I did." He sat down, picked up the first document. And for the next 2 hours, He did not say a single unnecessary word. He read everything. He asked 3 specific questions. Clean, precise, the questions of a man who understood exactly what he was looking at. And Margaret answered each one without hesitation, because she had anticipated all 3. When he was done, he set the last page down and looked at her. "The letter is the linchpin," he said. "Whitaker's signature connecting him directly to Marsh's account manipulation. Everything else supports it, but that letter is the thing that makes this prosecutable rather than just defensible." "I know," she said. "Where did you find it?" "In a bundle of misfiled supply invoices, behind a delivery record from 2.5 years ago." Calloway looked at her for a long moment. "Do you understand what would have happened to this ranch if you hadn't found it?" "Yes," she said. "I do." He turned to Jackson. "Your man Aldridge at the county office. He's accepted a filing from Whitaker's attorney. That filing is fraudulent because it's based on manufactured evidence of financial mismanagement. The financial records Marsh created and Whitaker commissioned are false documents. That's not a civil matter. That's criminal fraud." He straightened the stack of papers. "We don't just defeat Whitaker's claim. We take this to the territorial prosecutor." Jackson was very still. "You think it rises to that level?" "I think if we present this correctly, Whitaker faces criminal exposure, his attorney faces disbarment, and Aldridge faces removal from office at minimum." Calloway paused. "The question is whether you want to pursue that, or whether you want to simply defend the ranch and be done with it." Jackson looked at Margaret. She looked back at him. "He didn't just come after one ranch," she said. "Ruiz said he's been buying distressed properties across the county for 3 years. If the distress was manufactured, then there are other people who lost land they shouldn't have lost," Jackson said. "Yes." He looked at Calloway. "We go all the way." Calloway nodded once, with the satisfied efficiency of a man who had hoped that would be the answer. "Then I need 3 days to prepare the formal response to the county petition and draft the criminal complaint. I'll need a quiet place to work." "You have the whole house," Jackson said. "I'll need Miss Collins available for questions." "She's available," Jackson said. And looked at her with something in his expression that she was beginning to understand was his version of saying something he didn't quite have the words for yet. She looked away before either of them had to deal with it. The next 3 days were the most focused Margaret had ever worked. Calloway was exacting and efficient, and treated her as a professional peer without ever making a point of doing so, which was the only way that kind of treatment meant anything. He asked questions, she answered. He needed documents, she produced them. He restructured the order of the evidence twice, and both times he explained his reasoning, and both times she agreed it was an improvement. On the second evening, while Jackson was out checking the northern fence line, Calloway looked up from the document he was reviewing and said, without preamble, "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" She considered the question. "Officially, never. I've been a cook and a housekeeper. And unofficially? Since I was about 16, and I had to manage my father's accounts because he stopped being able to do it himself." She paused. "I kept track of things. I noticed things. It turns out that's most of what this is." "Most of what law is," Calloway said, "is also that. Noticing things that other people don't want noticed." He went back to his document. "You'd have made a good attorney, Miss Collins." She looked at the page in front of her. Something moved through her. Not quite pride, because pride was something she had learned to be careful with, but something adjacent to it. Something that recognized itself in the words. "I'll take that," she said. Cody came into the kitchen on the third morning with a look on his face that Margaret had learned to read as trouble. "Ryder came up the south road," he said. "Left something at the gate." He set a folded note on the table. She opened it. It was not from Whitaker's attorney. It was not a legal document. It was 4 lines in a plain hand, unaddressed, unsigned. She read it once, set it down, read it again. "What does it say?" Calloway asked. She turned it so he could see. The note said, "Drop the county filing or the woman gets hurt." The kitchen went absolutely silent. Calloway's face did something controlled and cold. "He knows," he said. Someone told him we were preparing a response. She looked at Cody. Who's come on this property in the last 3 days? Cody shook his head. Nobody I don't know. Alder came back yesterday to deliver his signed affidavit. That's the only outside person. Alder, Calloway said. Tom Alder is honest, Jackson said from the doorway. He had come in quietly, and she hadn't heard him. His eyes were on the note. He's been honest his whole career. Honest men talk, Calloway said. Not maliciously. They mention something at dinner. Their wife says something to the wrong person. He looked at the note. It doesn't matter how Whitaker found out. What matters is that this, he pointed to the paper, is a threat against a named individual, and it just became part of our criminal complaint. Jackson crossed the room, picked up the note. His jaw was doing the thing it did when the anger was very close to the surface. She's not going to get hurt, he said. The words came out flat. Absolute. Not a promise, so much as a statement of fact about what the future would contain. Margaret looked at him. Jackson. No. He set the note down, looked at Calloway. How much faster can we move? I file tomorrow instead of the day after, Calloway said. It's tight, but it's possible if we work through tonight. Then we work through tonight. I'll need coffee, Calloway said, practical as ever. I'll make it, Margaret said. She got up, built the fire higher, set the water to boil, and while her hands did the familiar grounding work of the kitchen, her mind moved through the new information with the same systematic attention she brought to everything. Whitaker knew they were preparing. He had sent a threat because he was rattled, and rattled men made mistakes. But rattled men who were also cornered were dangerous in a different way, and she needed to think about what he might do next that they hadn't anticipated. She was still thinking about it when she heard boots on the porch, 2 sets, heavy, unfamiliar. Ruiz appeared in the kitchen doorway a second later, and his face had the particular quality of someone delivering news he would have preferred not to deliver. 2 men at the gate, he said. They say they're from the county sheriff's office. They have a document. Everyone in the kitchen went still. What kind of document? Calloway asked. They're calling it a temporary injunction. They say it restricts any legal filings related to the Reed Ranch property pending review of the county petition. Calloway was on his feet before Ruiz finished the sentence. That's not possible. An injunction of that scope requires a circuit judge's signature. The county sheriff cannot. He stopped, looked at Jackson. Aldridge. He's moved faster than we expected. He's had someone push this through before we could file our response. Can they do that? Jackson asked. Legally? No, not without proper authority. But if they have a document with an official seal and a judge's signature, even a fraudulent one, enforcing it while it's being challenged takes time we may not have. Calloway was already sorting through his papers. Let me see the document. I went to the gate with Jackson. Margaret stayed in the kitchen for exactly 30 seconds and then followed, because she was not going to sit in the kitchen while decisions were made about her case. The 2 men at the gate were county deputies, young, official-looking, uncomfortable in the way of men who are carrying out instructions they don't fully understand. One of them held a folded document, which he extended to Calloway with the careful manner of a man handing something he was glad to be rid of. Calloway read it. His expression gave nothing away. He read it a second time. This injunction, he said, his voice professionally measured, is signed by Judge Harold Prentice. Yes, sir. Judge Prentice retired 14 months ago. Dead silence. The deputy who had handed over the document looked at the other deputy. We were told. You were given a fraudulent document, Calloway said. With the calm of a man who has just won an argument he knew he was always going to win. Signed by a judge with no current authority, it is legally meaningless. He folded it and tucked it under his arm. I'm keeping this. It has now become Exhibit A in a criminal fraud complaint that I am filing tomorrow morning against Charles Whitaker, his attorney of record, and a county land office clerk named Aldridge. He looked at both deputies with the particular clarity of a man, ensuring that he is understood completely. If either of you were directed to deliver this document by someone other than your direct sheriff, I strongly suggest you think carefully about whether that person's instructions are worth the trouble you are about to be in." The two deputies looked at each other. The younger one cleared his throat. "We were told to come by Walt Greer, sir." He said the sheriff had asked him to. "Greer is a civilian," Calloway said. "He has no authority to direct county deputies, which means someone used him as a middleman to keep their own name off this." He paused. "Thank you, gentlemen. You've just given me another name for my complaint." They left considerably faster than they had arrived. Jackson looked at Calloway. Calloway looked at the document under his arm. "Whitaker is panicking," he said. "Panicking men overreach. This," he lifted the document, "is a serious overreach. He's exposed Aldridge, he's exposed Greer, and he's given us documented evidence of an attempt to obstruct a legal process." He turned back toward the house. "We need to work faster, tonight." Margaret had been standing 3 feet behind Jackson through the entire exchange. She had not said a word. But when Calloway turned and saw her face, he stopped. "What?" he said. "If Whitaker's panicking," she said slowly, "he's going to want to see it for himself. He doesn't trust people to report back accurately when things go wrong. He'll come here." Calloway went still. "You think he'll come to the ranch?" Jackson said. "I think he'll come tonight, or tomorrow morning at the latest." She looked at Jackson. "And if he comes here and confronts us directly, that's not just evidence. That's a witness event, with everyone present." The silence stretched for 3 seconds. Then Calloway said very quietly, "You want him to come. I want him to come here and say what he's been doing out loud, in front of a lawyer, in front of witnesses." She held his gaze. "He's going to underestimate me. He did it the first time he saw me at the gate, and he's going to do it again. Men like him always do." She paused. "Let him." Calloway looked at her for a long moment. "If he comes," he said carefully, "the goal is a confession, or something close enough to it that it stands in court. Yes, you'd need to provoke him carefully, lead him, without him realizing he's being led." "I've been doing that without realizing it had a name," she said, "my entire life." Calloway turned to Jackson. Jackson was looking at Margaret with that expression. She was still learning the full geography of. "Your call," Calloway said to him. Jackson looked at Margaret. "Is this what you want to do?" he said. Not whether it was smart, not whether it was safe, whether it was what she wanted. "Yes," she said. He nodded, a single, clean movement. "Then we're ready for him," he said. They worked through the night. Calloway finished the criminal complaint and the formal county petition response by 3 in the morning. Margaret organized the final evidence file with everything in the order Calloway would need to present it. Jackson sat with them for most of it, and when there was nothing left for him to do on the legal side, he went out and checked every gate and every approach road and came back and sat in the kitchen chair and waited, because that was the other thing a man like Jackson Reed was: present when it mattered. Cody and Pete and Ruiz rotated through the night on their own initiative, checking the perimeter, because nobody asked them to and nobody had to. Whitaker came at 9 o'clock in the morning. He came in a proper carriage this time. Not a wagon, not on horseback, but a carriage that announced he had come to conclude business. He had a man with him on the driver's bench who was very large and very deliberately positioned, and a second man riding alongside who Margaret assessed immediately as a hired attorney of some kind, based on the coat and the way he sat. Margaret was the one who went to the gate. Jackson was behind her, far enough back that Whitaker's attention would naturally go to her first. Calloway was at the kitchen window. Ruiz was near the barn. Cody and Pete were elsewhere on the property, at positions Jackson had identified the night before. Whitaker climbed down from the carriage with his usual ease, looked at her. That same assessment, that same dismissal. "Miss?" He paused, because he didn't know her last name, had never bothered to learn it. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Reed." "Mr. Reed is aware of your visit," she said pleasantly. "You can speak with both of us." A slight compression of his lips. "This is a legal matter." "Then you'll want his legal representative present as well." She stepped to the side. "Please come in. She watched the calculation move through him. The slight surprise that there was a legal representative, the decision that it didn't ultimately matter because he had a lawyer of his own, the fundamental underestimation of the situation, because she was still the one standing at the gate, and he had already decided she was furniture. He came in. She led him to the kitchen, where Calloway was seated at the table with the organized evidence file in front of him, looking exactly like what he was. A man who had spent the night preparing and was ready. Whitaker's attorney, a soft-faced man named Brixton, whose name Calloway had recognized immediately and with visible distaste, took the chair across from Calloway. Whitaker remained standing, which was his way of asserting authority in a room, and Margaret noticed it and filed it. "Mr. Reed." Whitaker addressed Jackson, who had come in behind her. "I'll be direct. My attorney has advised me that there may have been some procedural irregularities in how the county filing was processed. In the interest of resolving this matter cleanly, I'm prepared to withdraw the boundary challenge and the county petition entirely." Jackson said nothing. "In exchange," Whitaker continued, "I'd like a simple agreement that no further legal action will be pursued regarding any of these matters. A clean resolution for both parties." He smiled. The reasonable, warm smile that Margaret had already learned was the most dangerous expression he had. She was the one who spoke. "What irregularities?" she said. Whitaker looked at her with the slight impatience of a man who was tolerating an interruption. "Procedural matters, nothing that needs to be detailed." "I think it does need to be detailed," she said. "Because from where I'm standing, what you're describing as procedural irregularities is the use of a retired judge's signature on a fraudulent injunction, delivered through an unauthorized civilian, to obstruct a legal filing against a criminal fraud complaint." She kept her voice completely conversational. "Which is not an irregularity. It's a crime." Complete silence. Whitaker's expression changed, just slightly. The warmth went out of it. "I don't know what you think you—" "Dale Marsh kept your letter," Margaret said. And there it was. She watched it happen in real time, the color change, the slight backward shift of his weight. The moment when Charles Whitaker understood that the woman he had dismissed as irrelevant had been the most dangerous person in the room this entire time. "I don't know what letter you're referring to," he said. The warmth was entirely gone now. In its place was the cold, careful voice of a man managing sudden exposure. "The one where you instructed him to manufacture specific financial records to support a county land office petition for forced sale review." She reached into the file and placed it on the table between them. Not pushing it toward him, just placing it where he could see it. "Your signature, his name, 3 categories of false documentation described in your own handwriting." Brixton, the attorney, leaned forward. He looked at the letter. His face went the particular gray of a man who has just realized his client did not tell him everything. "Charles," Brixton started. "Don't," Whitaker said sharply. "The mineral deposit assessment," Margaret continued, because she was leading him and she was not going to stop, "is also documented. The notation in the original survey that your acquisition team identified 6 years ago. The one that makes your offer of 1/16 its actual value, not just low, but calculated." She looked at him. "You knew exactly what you were trying to buy. You've known for 6 years. This is speculation," Whitaker said. His voice was controlled, but something underneath it was not. "Walt Greer is a witness," she said. "He's been receiving payment from someone for 3 years. He's not a man who will protect a principal when the principal's position becomes untenable." She paused. "And Aldridge at the county land office has already been interviewed this morning by the territorial prosecutor's office." That last part was a calculated gamble. Calloway had contacted the prosecutor's office 2 days ago. Whether they had moved on Aldridge yet, she didn't know for certain. But Whitaker didn't know she didn't know. He went very still. "You're bluffing," he said. "Am I?" She held his gaze. "You drove up here this morning to offer a clean resolution. You don't do that when you're winning." She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "You did it because someone told you about the affidavit, about the petition response, about the criminal complaint that Mr. Calloway filed this morning at 7 o'clock in the county seat." She tilted her head. "That was before you left to come here, Mr. Whitaker. It's already filed. The room was absolutely still. Calloway said calmly, "The filing is time-stamped at 7:14 this morning. I have the receipt." He placed it on the table next to the letter. Whitaker looked at both documents. He looked at Calloway. He looked at Jackson. And then, last, he looked at Margaret. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time since he had arrived at this ranch. And she could see the moment when the full weight of it landed on him. Not just that he had been outmaneuvered. That he had been outmaneuvered by the person he had decided, within 30 seconds of seeing her, was not worth paying attention to. "Everything you have done to this ranch," she said, her voice still even, still conversational, because she had not come this far to let anger make her sloppy, "is documented. The scheme Dale Marsh ran on the inside. The supply theft Greer executed on the outside. The fraudulent county petition. The false injunction. The threat delivered to this property 3 days ago." She held his gaze. "The territorial prosecutor has that threat as well." Whitaker's attorney stood up. "Charles, I need to advise you not to say anything further. Sit down, Brixton." "Charles, I am telling you as your legal counsel." "I said sit down." But there was no authority in it anymore. It was the voice of a man who was deciding something, fast, in a situation that had collapsed around him faster than he had thought possible. He looked at Margaret. "You're a cook," he said. Low. Not quite contemptuous anymore. Something closer to bewildered. "I'm the ranch manager," she said. "And I used to be a cook. And before that I was a housekeeper. And in all of those positions, for my entire adult life, people like you looked at me the way you're looking at me right now, and then went back to their conversations, and I listened, and I learned, and I kept track." She leaned forward by just a fraction. "You should have paid attention to who was in the room, Mr. Whitaker. You should have asked someone's name before you decided they didn't matter." The silence after that had a texture to it. It was Calloway who moved things forward, because that was his function, and he was very good at it. "My client is open to a negotiated resolution," he said, "that does not require a full criminal trial. That resolution would include a complete and documented withdrawal of all filings against the Reed Ranch, a signed statement of the scheme as it was conducted, restitution for the documented financial losses sustained over the past 3 years, and cooperation with the territorial prosecutor's investigation into the other property acquisitions in this county." He paused. "In exchange, Mr. Reed would not pursue the maximum criminal exposure available to him. That is a considerable courtesy, given what the documentation supports." Brixton was already leaning toward Whitaker, speaking in a low, urgent voice. Whitaker did not look at his attorney. He looked at Margaret. "You planned this," he said. "The whole thing. You wanted me to come here." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Something moved across his face. Not respect exactly. Too much pride for that. But a recognition she had never expected to see on a face like his, and it cost him something visible to show it. "Fine," he said. One word. Everything behind it. Calloway produced a document. He had drafted it the night before at 2 in the morning, because Margaret had told him Whitaker would come and would need somewhere to land, and a man with nowhere to land became unpredictable. Whitaker read it. His attorney read it. There was a 20-minute conversation in low voices at the other end of the kitchen table that Margaret did not try to hear, because it was not her conversation to hear. She sat across from Jackson, and Jackson looked at her, and she looked back, and the understanding that passed between them needed no words, had outgrown words sometime in the last 2 weeks. Whitaker signed it. He signed the accompanying statement. He signed the cooperation agreement with the prosecutor's office. And then he stood up from the table with the careful movements of a man making sure nothing shows, and he looked at Jackson. "You have good people working for you," he said. "I know it," Jackson said. Whitaker did not look at Margaret again. She thought about what that meant, and decided it was the most honest thing he had done since he arrived. He left. The carriage went down the mountain road and was gone. For a long moment, nobody in the kitchen said anything. Then Cody, who had apparently come in through the side door without anyone noticing, said, "Is it done?" "It's done," Calloway said. "Did we win?" Calloway looked at Margaret. "We did." Cody let out a breath that he had clearly been holding for some time. "Good," he said. Because I have biscuits in the oven, and I didn't want them to burn while people were still in danger. Jackson made a sound, a real sound, a laugh, the first full one she had heard from him, and it changed his face entirely. And Ruiz, who had appeared in the doorway behind Cody at some point, said something in Spanish that had the unmistakable cadence of relief. And Pete was there too. And suddenly the kitchen was full of people who had all, in their various ways, been holding their breath for 3 weeks. Margaret sat very still in the middle of all of it. The noise of people who trusted each other and had come through something together. The smell of Cody's biscuits, which were, she had to admit, better than they had been 3 weeks ago, because he had been paying attention to how she made them. The sound of Jackson's laugh settling into something quieter and more sustained, a warmth that stayed in the room after the laugh itself was finished. She pressed her palm flat on the table. The coins had left marks in it 3 weeks ago, in a dusty alley in Red Willow. The marks were gone now, but she remembered the weight of them. Calloway touched her shoulder once, briefly, as he gathered his papers. The professional acknowledgement of a man who understood what had just happened and what it had taken. I'll be in contact about the prosecutor's process, he said. There'll be more documentation needed, but the ranch is secure. He paused. You know that. Yes, she said. I know. He left to prepare for his return to Helena. The kitchen slowly emptied as the hands went back to the work of the day. Because a ranch did not stop running because its future had just been secured, and these were men who knew that better than anyone. Jackson stayed. He pulled out the chair beside her, not across from her, the way they usually sat, but beside her, and he sat down and put his forearms on the table and looked at the cleared surface where the evidence file had been, and the signed documents that Calloway had taken with him, and the empty space where 3 weeks of work had lived. Margaret, he said. I know, she said. Don't. I haven't said anything yet. You're going to say thank you. You've said it 3 times already, and each time it doesn't come close to what you mean, and you know it doesn't, and I know it doesn't. He was quiet for a moment. Then what do I say? He asked. She looked at her hands on the table. At the kitchen she had cleaned and organized and run for 3 weeks. At the window where the morning light was doing what morning light did at this altitude, which was arrive with a particular clarity that she had noticed from the first morning and had quietly loved every morning since. Nothing, she said. You don't have to say anything. Eleanor used to say that the things worth saying were the ones people avoided because they were hard, Jackson said. Slowly, like a man choosing each word with care. She was right about most things. She sounds like she was, Margaret said. I don't want you to go, he said. The words came out simple, direct, without any of the elaborate construction a man used when he was trying to protect himself from the plainness of what he felt. She looked at him. He looked back. The steady dark eyes that had not wavered the first time she'd seen them in that alley, and had not wavered since. The ranch has a manager, he said. A good one. The books are straight. The hands respect the person running the kitchen. Everything is running the way a ranch should run. He paused. I'm not asking you to stay because I need a cook. I know that, she said. Then why haven't you answered? She thought about $4.32. About the weight of being seen as less than you were for so long that you started to wonder if they were right. About the specific loneliness of being in rooms full of people and being invisible in all of them. About an alley in Red Willow and a shadow and the voice of a man who had gone looking for her when he didn't have to. Because the last time someone offered me something good, she said, it turned out to have conditions. Mine doesn't, he said. She looked at him for a long time. I know that too, she said. Outside, one of the horses called from the paddock. Somewhere on the property, she could hear Cody and Pete talking. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a working place where people knew what they were doing and did it without drama. The biscuits smelled done. Ask me again in the spring, she said finally. When the prosecutor's case is closed and the county matter is settled, and this ranch has had a full season of running the way it's supposed to run. She met his eyes. Ask me when neither of us has anything left to prove, and we know what this is made of. Jackson Reed looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he nodded. The same single, clean movement that meant he had made up his mind and didn't need to say anything else about it. "Spring," he said. "Spring," she agreed. He got up and went to take the biscuits out of the oven, because Cody had forgotten them, and the kitchen filled with the smell of something warm and finished and right. Margaret picked up her pencil. She opened the ledger to a fresh page, and she began to write the first entry of what she had already, quietly, begun to think of as a new account. The spring came to the Montana mountains the way it always did. Slowly, then all at once. The snow on the upper pastures thinned across March and was mostly gone by the second week of April, and the ranch moved into its busiest season with the particular controlled urgency of people who knew exactly what needed to be done and had learned how to do it together. Cattle had to be moved. Fences had to be walked. The supply system Margaret had restructured over the winter ran clean and on schedule. Every delivery verified against the order. Every invoice matched to the ledger before payment went out. She had been at the Reed Ranch for 5 months. It did not feel like 5 months. It felt, in the way that right places always feel, like considerably longer and no time at all simultaneously. The prosecutor's case against Charles Whitaker had proceeded through the winter with the grinding, methodical pace of territorial justice. Calloway had been thorough. The documentation Margaret had built was, according to him, some of the cleanest evidentiary organization he had seen from a non-legal source, which he said in his direct, unadorned way that meant it was genuine. Aldridge had been removed from the county land office in January. Walt Greer had cooperated with the prosecution in exchange for reduced charges, which surprised no one who had assessed him correctly from the beginning. Dale Marsh had been located in Nebraska and was facing his own separate proceedings. Whitaker himself had hired 3 attorneys and was making the process as slow as a man of his resources could make it. But the signed statement he had produced in Jackson's kitchen was not something 3 attorneys could make disappear, and Calloway had been clear from the beginning that the outcome, while slow, was not in doubt. What the prosecution had also uncovered, as it worked through Whitaker's land acquisition records, was exactly what Margaret had suspected in the kitchen that night when she first named the possibility. 4 other ranches in the county had been subjected to variations of the same scheme. 3 of them had already sold, distressed, desperate, believing they had no other option. The 4th had held on by the kind of stubborn luck that sometimes substitutes for information. Those 4 families were now part of the prosecution. Their testimony was going to make what happened to the Reed Ranch look like the outline of a much larger picture. Margaret thought about them sometimes. The people who had lost things they couldn't get back because nobody had been paying attention at the right moment. It sat with her in a way that wasn't guilt. She had not been there to prevent those losses, but something adjacent to responsibility. A sense that what she had done here mattered in ways that extended past the fence line of this property. She was thinking about that on the morning in early April when Jackson came into the kitchen and sat down across from her and said, "Spring." She looked up from the ledger. He was looking at her with the steady eyes that still, after 5 months, communicated more than most people managed with full sentences. "Spring," she said. "I said I'd ask again." "You said you'd ask in spring." "It's spring." She set down the pencil, looked at him. This man who had run a mountain ranch alone for years after losing the person he had built it with. Who had hired her with $4 in her hand and bleeding feet and a reference from a family that had let her go for the worst of reasons. Who had sat at this table in the cold of October and listened to her tell him his ranch was being stolen, and had not doubted her for a single moment. "The ranch is running clean," she said. "Yes. The prosecutor's case doesn't need my daily attention anymore. Calloway has everything he needs." "He does. And the hands." She paused. "Cody burned breakfast twice last week when I was writing the northern section." "He did," Jackson said. "He knows it. He needs supervision." "He does." She looked at him. "Jackson." "Margaret." "You're going to have to actually say it," she said. "I'm not going to let you do this entirely in single words." Something moved across his face. That thing that was not quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. He folded his hands on the table, looked at her directly. "I would like you to stay," he said. "Not as the ranch manager, though you are, and have been, and I'd be a fool to want that to change." He paused. "I'd like you to stay as more than that." "More than that is a very broad category," she said, but gently, because she knew what he meant, and she was not going to make it harder than it already was for a man who did not find these words easy. He looked at her steadily. "I'm asking you to marry me, Margaret." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, she could hear Cody in the yard, doing something with the water trough that involved more noise than it should have. She could hear one of the horses. She could hear the particular sound the wind made coming off the mountain in April, which was different from October's wind, lighter, carrying something that hadn't been in it before. She had known the question was coming since he said spring. She had been living with it for 5 months, turning it over in the particular way she turned things over. Patiently, thoroughly, from every angle, until she understood its full shape. What she understood was this. She was not afraid of the question. She was not afraid of what it meant for her work, or her standing, or her independence, because she had already learned that those things did not diminish in this house. She was not afraid of Jackson Reed, who had proved every day for 5 months to be exactly what he appeared to be, which was rare enough that she had checked for it repeatedly before she allowed herself to believe it. What she had been afraid of was smaller and more honest than any of that. She had been afraid of wanting something so much that losing it would undo what she had spent years building. The self that could survive anything because it had survived everything. She was not going to let that fear decide for her. "Yes," she said. One word, everything behind it. Jackson's face did something she had never seen it do before. The control that he carried as naturally as other men carried hats. The steady, managed composure that she had come to read as the architecture of who he was, came loose for just a moment. Just enough that she could see, underneath it, how much the answer had mattered. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. His grip was warm and certain. "Spring was your idea," he said. "It was a good idea," she said. He laughed. The real one. The one that changed his face. And she felt something she recognized now, something she had first felt in the wagon coming up the mountain in October. The sensation of a door that had been closed for so long, she had stopped seeing it as a door opening into a room she had not known existed. Cody burned breakfast again that morning, but nobody mentioned it, and he ate his own charred biscuits with the expression of a man who has decided to learn from his mistakes, which Margaret found deeply gratifying. The wedding was in May. It was not a large affair. Margaret had not wanted large. She had spent enough of her life navigating rooms full of people who had opinions about her to have any desire to do it on the most significant day she could remember. What she wanted was honest, and what she got was that. Calloway came from Helena, because he was the person who had stood in that kitchen through the worst of it and deserved to stand there for the best of it too. Tom Alder came, with his wire-rimmed spectacles and his precise professional congratulations. A minister from the valley town, 12 miles west, performed the ceremony in the yard, in the particular clear light of a Montana May morning, with the hands present, and a meal after that, Margaret had planned with the same systematic attention she brought to everything. Cody cried. He cried quietly, and with his back half turned, and he denied it afterward, and everyone allowed the denial without discussion, which was the kindest thing any of them could have done. Ruiz shook Jackson's hand, and then turned to Margaret and said something in Spanish, low and direct. "What did he say?" she asked Jackson afterward. "He said you were the best thing that ever came up this mountain road," Jackson said. She thought about this road. About 12 miles of it, in an October wagon, with a biscuit and dried apple and the particular feeling of something loosening in her chest that she hadn't known how to name yet. "Tell him I think the same about the road," she said. The prosecutorial proceedings against Charles Whitaker concluded in July, 4 months after the wedding, and when the verdict came through, Calloway sent a telegram that was 3 words. Complete. Documented. Permanent. Whitaker's land acquisition operation was dissolved by court order. The properties he had fraudulently obtained were subject to a restitution process that would take years to fully execute, but the framework was in place. Aldrich faced criminal charges of his own. The attorney Brixton had, as Calloway had predicted that first morning in the kitchen, faced disbarment proceedings. Jackson read the telegram at the kitchen table, set it down, looked at Margaret. "It's over," he said. "Yes." She looked at the telegram, then at him. "And the people who lost their ranches?" "Calloway says the restitution process will compensate them for the documented losses. It won't give back time, but it gives back the financial foundation." He paused. "One of them, the Harmon family, East County. Their daughter wrote to the prosecutor's office. She said if it weren't for the documentation from our case, they wouldn't have had enough to prove their own loss." Margaret was quiet for a moment. She thought about all the things she had noticed over a lifetime that nobody thought she was watching. All the small injustices she had filed away and carried, and eventually had to set down, because there was nothing to be done about them alone. She thought about what it meant to finally have the time and the place, and the standing to do something with what she noticed. "Good," she said, simply, meaning it more deeply than the word usually carried. The northern section of the ranch was independently assessed in August by a geological surveyor Calloway had recommended, a thorough, credentialed man from Billings who spent 3 days on the property and produced a report that Jackson and Margaret read together at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening. The mineral deposit was real. The survey notation from 1869 had, if anything, underestimated its extent. The report described it in the careful, measured language of professional geology. But what it said, translated into plain terms, was that the northern 40 acres of the Reed Ranch was worth considerably more than everything else Jackson owned combined. Jackson read the report twice, set it down, was quiet for a long time. "Eleanor's father helped my father claim this land," he said finally. "They came up here together in 1869. 2 men with nothing who thought good soil was enough to build on." "It was," Margaret said. "They had no idea." "No, but they built something worth having without knowing. That's not nothing, that's more than most." He looked at the report. "What do we do with it?" She had thought about this, had been thinking about it since August, when Calloway first told them the independent assessment was coming and what it might find. "You don't have to sell," she said. "You could develop it yourself. Bring in a mining operation under controlled terms, maintain ownership of the land, take a percentage of production." She paused. "Or you leave it. Leave it exactly as it is and let it be what it's always been. Land you work and tend and pass on to whoever comes next. Or some version of both," he said. "Yes. What do you think we should do?" She appreciated the "we" had come, over the months, to understand that it was not a performance of partnership, but the actual architecture of how he thought, which was one of the things she had checked for, and verified, and finally allowed herself to trust. "I think we use enough of it to do the thing we keep talking about and haven't done yet," she said. He looked at her. "The kitchen." "The kitchen," she said. They had talked about it in winter, first in the abstract, and then in increasingly specific terms. The idea that had come from Margaret's own thinking about what the ranch could be, beyond cattle and land. A proper working kitchen that could serve travelers passing through the mountain roads, ranch hands from surrounding properties, families making the long journey west who needed a meal and a place to stop that wouldn't require them to prove their worth before they were fed. A place where nobody got turned away for the way they looked. She had not said that part out loud when they first discussed it. But Jackson had looked at her when she described it, and she knew he heard it anyway. They broke ground in September. The kitchen expansion went up fast, because Jackson knew how to build, and the hands were willing, and Margaret had, characteristically, organized the project with a completeness that made every day of construction run without confusion. By November, it was finished. Not grand, but solid and warm and generous in its proportions. Long tables, a second stove, a good water system that Jackson engineered himself with quiet satisfaction. A door that was wide and faced the road. The first travelers they served were a family named Olson, a husband and wife and 3 children, coming down from the northern pass in a wagon that had seen better decades, heading for the valley. Margaret fed them without ceremony, which was the only way she knew how to do it, and the mother cried quietly while eating, which Margaret pretended not to see, because some things were private even when they happened in a room full of people. The father shook Jackson's hand at the door when they left, looked at Margaret. "God bless you, mem," he said, with the particular gravity of a man saying something he means all the way down. "Safe travels," she said. After they left, Cody, who had been helping serve and had taken to it with surprising aptitude, leaned against the kitchen doorframe and said, "You think they'll tell people?" "About the food?" Margaret asked. "About this place. That it's here," she considered. "They'll tell someone. Word moves the way it always moves, person to person, slow and steady." "Good word travels faster than bad," Ruiz said from the corner, where he was washing a stack of plates with the methodical efficiency that characterized everything he did. "Sometimes," Margaret said, "when people have somewhere to send it." Cody was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what I remember? That first morning. You'd been up since 4, made biscuits before anyone else was awake. I remember. I almost said something stupid at the gate, when Jackson brought you in. I know. I'm glad I didn't." She looked at him. This young man who had been 22 and skeptical in October, and was now something considerably more than that, though the process of becoming it had been so gradual that she suspected he hadn't fully noticed yet. "So am I," she said. What happened over the following months was not dramatic. It did not happen in any single event that could be pointed to and named. It accumulated, the way things that are built to last always accumulate, day by day, meal by meal, traveler by traveler, season by season. The kitchen became known. Not immediately, not with any announcement or fanfare, but the mountain road carried people, and people carried information, and the information that traveled about the Reed Ranch kitchen was the specific kind that women passed to each other in particular, the kind about a place where you would be treated as if your presence was welcome, where the food was honest, where the woman who ran it looked at you and saw a person rather than an assessment. Word reached Red Willow sometime in the late winter. Margaret knew it had when she heard, through Calloway's network of careful information, that Harlan Briggs's general store had been having a slow season. She did not feel satisfaction at that, exactly. She felt something quieter, a sense of things finding their proper proportion. She had not been back to Red Willow. Had not needed to. The town had been, for a single day in October, the full extent of her world, and now it was simply a place on the road that was sometimes mentioned and never visited. That seemed right. What she had not expected was the morning in February when she came into the kitchen and found a woman sitting at the long table. Not a traveler, or not only that. A woman about her own age, broad-shouldered, with the particular posture of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible in a world that consistently asked her to. She was sitting with her hands folded on the table and her eyes on the door, the way people sit when they have come to a place and are not certain they were right to. Margaret set down what she was carrying. "Good morning," she said. "Are you hungry?" The woman looked at her. Something in her face shifted. "I heard there was a place up here, a woman who ran a kitchen. Someone told me—" She stopped, started again. "I've been trying to find work. I cook. I've been cooking since I was 12. But everywhere I go, they look at me and they—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Margaret pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "What's your name?" she said. "Ruth. Ruth Danner. I'm Margaret." She folded her hands on the table. "Tell me what you can do." Ruth Danner told her. She was thorough and specific, and made no apologies and no unnecessary justifications. And by the end of it, Margaret had a clear picture of someone who knew their work well and had been prevented from doing it for reasons that had nothing to do with their work. "I have a second kitchen now," Margaret said. "I need someone who can run the noon service independently. The work is hard, and the pay is fair, and the only thing I require is that every person who comes through that door gets fed with the same respect, regardless of what they look like or where they're from." Ruth was very still. "You're serious," she said. "I've never said anything I wasn't serious about." You don't know me. I knew myself," Margaret said. "That's enough to start." Ruth Danner started the following week. She was, as she had described, very good. She moved through a kitchen with the particular efficiency of someone who had been doing this work for years, in conditions that never gave her adequate tools, which meant that when she had adequate tools, the results were exceptional. The noon service, which she ran with a focused competence that reminded Margaret of herself in a way that was both satisfying and slightly humbling, became the part of the day that the ranch hands most reliably appeared for. Cody ate 2 servings at the first noon service. Ruth ran and then said with genuine admiration, "That's the best venison stew I've ever eaten." Ruth looked at him with the careful expression of someone waiting to see if there was something else behind the compliment. There wasn't. Cody had the straightforward face of a man saying exactly what he meant. She nodded. Said, "I'll make it again Thursday." Jackson watched all of it. He watched with the quiet attentiveness that was one of the things Margaret had come to rely on about him. The way he observed without interjecting, understood without needing to be told, and offered his perspective when it was useful and held it when it wasn't. One evening, after the kitchen had closed and Ruth had gone to the room Margaret had arranged for her in the main house, Jackson sat across from Margaret at the kitchen table and said, "Eleanor would have done the same thing, with Ruth." "I know," Margaret said. "You've told me enough about her that I know. You're not competing with her memory. I want you to know that. I don't feel like I am." She looked at him steadily. "She built this place with you. What's here now, the way it runs, what it's becoming, it's built on what she helped start. I don't see that as competition. I see it as a foundation." He looked at her with the expression she knew completely now, the one that meant he was absorbing something she had said and would carry it. "She would have said something better than that," he said. "Probably," Margaret agreed. "But I said what I mean, and that's what I have." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over and held his, and they sat like that for a while in the quiet kitchen, with the fire low and the mountain outside doing what Montana mountains did at night, which was exist with a completeness that made everything human feel simultaneously small and exactly the right size. She had $4.32 on the day she arrived in Red Willow. She had counted them 17 times. She had carried them in a closed fist and lost them to a cruel man's sweep of his hand and gotten back on her knees on a dirty floor and retrieved every single one. She thought about those coins sometimes, not with bitterness. Bitterness was a luxury she had never been able to afford, and had decided, a long time ago, she didn't want. She thought about them the way she thought about the survey stake on the northern section, as the mark of where something had been before it became what it was. The world had been trying to tell her, for 29 years, what she was worth. It had been wrong every time. It had been wrong in Cheyenne and in Colorado and in Billings, and on the floor of Harlan Briggs's general store. It had been wrong in the assessing eyes of every person who had looked at her body and decided they had seen everything there was to see. Charles Whitaker had been wrong. He had built a machine designed to take something from a man who deserved to keep it, and the machine had been dismantled by the person he decided was not worth watching. She thought about Ruth Danner, sitting at the table with her hands folded, waiting to be turned away. She thought about what it meant to be the person who did not turn someone away. On a morning in late April, almost a year exactly from the morning Jackson had said spring across the kitchen table, Margaret went to the gate of the ranch to meet a supply delivery from the new depot account she had established in the fall. The driver was a man she didn't know, a new hire at the depot, and he looked at her with the beginning of the familiar expression, the top-to-bottom assessment. And then he saw something in her face, or her posture, or simply the way she stood on her own ground, and the assessment stopped. "Miss Collins?" he said, because the old name was on the account paperwork, established before the wedding. "Mrs. Reed," she said. Not to correct him exactly, just because it was true, and true things deserved to be said plainly. "Everything on that order?" He checked the manifest. "Yes, ma'am. All present." "Good. Drive it around to the kitchen door." He did. She signed the delivery sheet. Checked the count against the order the way she always checked it, because some habits were not about distrust, but about being the kind of person who knew what they had. Everything matched. It always matched now. She walked back to the kitchen. Ruiz was at the table, working on the fence repair schedule for the upper pasture. Ruth was at the stove, already into the preparation for the noon service. moving with the particular focused rhythm of someone who had found the place where their competence lived and was operating inside it. Jackson was somewhere on the property, doing what he did in the early morning, which was tend to the things that tended back. Cody would appear at 7, loudly, with the energy of a young man who had somehow become, over the past year, someone she was genuinely fond of. Margaret set the delivery manifest in its folder, put the folder in its place, picked up the ledger, opened it to the day's page, wrote the date at the top, wrote the delivery confirmation, looked at the column of figures that represented this ranch, its costs, its revenues, its supply chains, its wages, its maintenance, its expanding kitchen operation, its slow and steady accumulation of the kind of financial health that comes from a place being run by people who care about it. The numbers were good, not extravagant. Good. The kind of good that was built day by day and could be counted on. She set the pencil down, looked at the page, then looked up, out through the kitchen window, at the mountain morning doing what it did, arriving with that particular clarity that she had noticed from the first day and had loved every day since. She thought about the alley in Red Willow, about a shadow that stopped a respectful distance away, about a voice that said, "Don't cry, you're coming with me," and meant it. She thought about what she had been, in that alley, and what she was now, and whether those were different things, or whether. And this was what she had come to believe, slowly and carefully, and with the patience she brought to everything. Whether she had always been exactly this, and the only thing that had changed was that she had finally found the place where it could be seen. She had not been made by this ranch. She had not been made by Jackson Reed's willingness to look. She had not been made by the case she built, or the evidence she found, or the morning she sat across from Charles Whitaker and watched him understand how wrong he had been. She had been made by her own life, by every hard year and every cruel room and every coin retrieved from a dirty floor. By every account she had balanced for people who never thanked her, every meal she had made for households that never noticed, everything she had noticed and kept and carried until she was somewhere that it mattered. Jackson Reed had not saved Margaret Collins. He had simply been the first person in a long time who knew to look in the alley, and she had done the rest. She picked up the pencil. She was not too big. She was not too much. She was not too anything. She was exactly sufficient. She always had been. The ledger opened to a clean page, and Margaret Collins Reed set the tip of the pencil to the paper and began another day of building the life that had always, underneath everything, been hers to claim.